Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another edition of WOWSA Live with our host, Ned Denison. Ned?
Hello, everyone. I'm an epic marathon swimmer and chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have one of our honorees with us, Captain Boat Pilot Mike Oram from England. I'm going to ask Mike, who has the most successes of any pilot ever in the English Channel, I'm going to ask him to give us a less than 50-year recap of his experience in channel swimming. Mike?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been going since '82, and at the moment I've done around about 800 crossings, and plus about 150 wetsuit swims on top. Just on the swim side, I've done another God knows how many rows and all the other bits and pieces we do as well, because the swimming is only a part of what we get up to.
And you were one of the leading lights in starting the Channel Piloting and Swimming Federation.
Yeah, well, I started that. My wife and I started the federation in 1990. Well, we started in 1998, but it took a couple of years to get round all of the bits and pieces with the authorities. But we kicked it off in 2000, not expecting it to be anything like it turned into. The only reason I started it was because there was a fallout within the CSA, and I said to my swimmers I was going to retire second time round, because I retired in 1982 already, you see, and they all said, well, we want to swim with you, so we'll carry on with you. So I started the federation so that they could carry on with me, but it grew so quickly, and it got, well, Angie and I ran it through till 2011, and then I sat back and let the rest of them take it over. But
and for channel pilots, Mike, we can, not necessarily you're the example, but some people have this impression that there's a few people, all they do in Dover is take a few swimmers over in the summer. I think you've got another business or two on the side. Is that a fair description?
It's the other way around with me. The channel swimming is only small part of what we actually. It's a fairly large part of the turnover, but it's a small part of the business. We run a sea school and we train up skippers. In fact, we trained most of the all of the skippers with the federation, I think. Possibly Paul Foreman had a yacht masters before we started doing the training, but we did the rest. And we also do escort work, safety work for television, and we escort the various adventure crossings and extreme events as well, and we do the triathlon swims, and we do all the wetsuit swims.
Okay, and these wetsuit swims, they get in England, they go over to France, they celebrate, but they don't call themselves English Channel solo swimmers. Is that a fair description?
Yes, there are a fair number of wetsuit swimmers that swim the channel in wetsuits as something, and they're not fussed about whether it's registered or anything else. But 90% of our wetsuit swims, 25 plus a year, are part of the London to Paris triathlons. They run to Dover, swim the channel, and cycle to Paris, and that's part of where because it's an extreme sport. Some of them 10-15% of them do it in standard costumes, but by the time they've run from London to Dover, had 3 or 4 hours rest and then swum the channel, it really is a wetsuit profession, that one. And that's why it is. Channel swimming people seem to think channel swimming is the only subject and be all and end all. They don't understand that it's also a big part of a lot of other sports. So, and it's a dedicated sport. It's a strange sport as far as I can see, and what I understand. It's a load of individual people who find a means of mixing, who then understand how to mix, and they've all got a desire to prove something to themselves or to challenge life, and very few of them are prepared for the change that happens when they do it. And it doesn't matter whether they're successful or not, as long as they get wet, they come out the water a completely different person. It's quite strange actually, because most of the swimmers that do it have a form of depression after they're successful, But the unsuccessful ones don't have depression. They're full of joys of spring. And sometimes I think to myself, they failed it so they can go back to the beach to mix again for another year. It's almost that status.
I think the ones who do complete it, they get up the next morning and they don't have a goal. There's nothing left in life. There's no reason to get up. Mike, describe to me in some detail the opening of a window. And I know now people are swimming on springs and neeps, but let's imagine in a day's time, you've got a beautiful set of weather conditions, a neap tide is starting, and every single boat thinks they're going to go out. What do you do in the next 24 hours between talking to your fledgling skippers and Coast Guard and permits and observers and...
It's not quite that our swim work and our swimming starts when we meet the team. The first the period before that, we arrange with the team what time we're going to meet, and we do regular updates. Well, I do regular updates and I do forecasts and I work out what is happening, because for what we've got in Dover, we are suffering from a microclimate. So the actual forecasts that they give out are never what is actually happening. So we do our own forecasting. We use Windy and we use the other various programs that give us the synopsis chart and what's happening, and then I work from there, because we can have wind in the North Sea, we can have wind down off Southampton, and we can have flat calm where we are. What they don't appreciate is that the channel is a river between two land masses, and those two land masses affect what happens on the water. So you get a forecast for a force 5, and if it's in the southwesterly, then it will be a force 3 in Dover, and it'll be a force 6 in France or something like that. It depends on how it works, with the temperature of the land heating up, causing sea breezes and all the other little bits. So it's that side of it is something that we do, but we don't have to do much about. Then really our swim work starts 3 or 4 hours before we start the swim, and then we're actually working for 24 hours, and that's it, finished. 24 hours plus if we're doing more than a single crossing.
And how many boats on the best day can actually go across the channel? What are the limits? The
agreement with the French is that we mustn't have more than 12 boats in the northeast lane, and that's 6 CSA boats and 6 Federation boats is the system. On various occasions there have been 7 or 8 CSA boats out, but it's I don't think as of yet, in the last 5 years since the agreement, we've managed to reach 12 boats have managed to reach the northeast lane.
And how do they all get out of Dover Harbor at the same time?
Well, that's no problem. In fact, half of them run out of Folkestone anyway. So the boats that are in Dover, you can leave. It's just a simple case of loading up, moving to the pontoon, loading everybody up, leaving, and ask permission to go. And because it's such a commercial port and so busy, we can, if we wanted to, we could go out line astern or 2 abreast all at the same time. We don't do that because it depends on the pilots, and the pilots all have different attitudes. Lance and I work, because we're a sea school, we work on understanding. Our job in life is to teach people how to do navigation. So we will quite often start 4 hours before or something like that, or 3 hours before. And that is also because we are in the outer marina, which is not tidal and not a problem, whereas the other boats are in a locked lock and can't get out till 3 hours before. And we start from places like Shakespeare Beach, which used to be the original star, whereas the other pilots, most of them go straight down to Samphire Hoe and start from Arrows Cliff. It's just the way everything works.
One of the things that you've been very successful at is taking the fastest swimmers across. And so, start with a Peter Stoichev, for example, and then what did you do differently for Trent Grimsey?
Well, in actual fact, it's not the fast swimmers. We've got the records for everything. The only one I don't have or haven't had is the youngest swimmer, and that's because that changed to 12 before I joined in '82. And I more than likely did have the youngest swimmer because I had an Indian girl who they said was 12, but I suspect was a lot younger. But no, it's nothing different really. It doesn't matter whether it's a record, but it doesn't matter a little bit if it's a record swim, because I'm working continuously and the course is updated every 3 or 4 minutes for the whole of the crossing. So for swims with Christoph and Peter and Trent, I'm actually working flat out all the time, because it's very important to know exactly what's happening, and nothing ever happens the same in the channel. So what I'm doing, and what I can do now, which we couldn't do originally, is I can use the AIS and I can use the computer and the sea, and I can tell from that exactly what the tide's doing, where it's going. So I can look and say, ah yes, tide's being held up, and I can look at the weather forecast and say, yes, that's going to be a delay. And when I plan my swims for them as well, I plan the swims around the weather pattern. We don't just go out and start because it's a good day. If you take, say, Peter for instance, we sat and there was about 15, 16 knots northwesterly blowing, and the other boats went out, and the Russian guy went out with Dave White to do a record swim. And they came back in again because it was a northwesterly. As they came in, I took Peter out because a northwesterly is a surfing sea. So we took him round and started. He left the beach in a sheltered sea area. As we got out, we were getting out with a surfing sea behind us, which was helping him to swim. The conditions were such that day that we had a system where it went from northwest to start with to southwest and changed the pattern of the tide. So we actually, and the tide turns towards France, and if the wind is holding the tide up, you get an extra bit of tide helping you across in the middle. And I don't know whether you can see it or not.
It's a pretty boring track. It's nearly straight, Mike. I've seen it. There's no style in it at all. It goes. I prefer the S. I prefer the S myself. It's more stylish.
You know, you either can do it or not. In actual fact, Peter's record and Trent's record would have been much closer, but Peter was a swimmer that did everything he should have done and put his head down and swam until he got 50 meters from the beach, and we landed him right on the point on the rocks, and he decided he was going to swim to the closest rock instead of swimming an extra 10 yards to the flat rock. So he spent best part of 1.5 2 minutes trying to climb out the water.
He doesn't tell that story, Mike.
You know, well, the funny thing was, when we left, the Russian come out and started behind us. They'd gone back in, but they saw that we were starting, come back and started behind us, and I tracked them, and they followed my course exactly to the T, so that they were going straight down the dotted line that I'd gone down. And Peter was panicking because they was behind us, and they were within 50 meters in front, 50 meters behind of each other, and he was panicking. I didn't say anything to him. I just said, swim, get your head down, you bastard, and get the other side. You know, which is one of the things you have to do. But when we got there and he landed, he was panicking because they were 25 minutes behind us, but they started 20 minutes behind us, and I said, you don't have to worry. And I said, he will not make it. And they were sitting, Peter was sitting there biting his nails, and I said, he won't make it, don't have to worry. And when we finished, he said to me, how did you know that they wouldn't make it? I said, because they were followed our track exactly, which meant that they were going to be 25 minutes further down the coast when they landed, which meant they had to go another 600 meters, which meant they would lose 15 minutes. and he landed, I think it was about 7 or 8 minutes behind him.
Yeah.
But it is very on the day, and it does the same with all of them, the 2-ways and the 3-ways. One of the most strange swims really was Phil Rush's 3-way. I mean, he got 6 records in 28 minutes and 27 seconds or something, 28 hours and 27 minutes or something.
I hear he paid you a reasonable compliment after the swim.
Yes, well, he gave me, no, that was before. We bantered, and I banter a lot anyway, because I like my swimmers to be relaxed when we start. And we bantered, and he said, and I said to him, oh, well, you know, get your finger out. Last time you were over with me, you were slow. And he said, yes, but I was learning and all that. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, if you get me a record, I'll give you the Rolex. So when I got the record and the other ones, I said, and I still say to him when I see him, where's my other 6 Rolexes? Because I got 7 records. But again, we did that. We started with Phil Rush's, we started 24 hours before any other swims. And we were finishing as the weather was breaking, but we swam and in perfect flat calm, beautiful conditions. And we had 2 hours off on the Varn on the way back on the 3rd leg for him to eat his beans on toast, because we had to fit into the tide to land on the pond. But that was,
is it still the case that his 3-way record was faster than Jackie Coble's solo?
no, I think Jackie was 20 minutes faster for 1 way than he was for 3.
Tell us
27 hours and 45 minutes, and put Phil is 28 hours and 27 minutes.
Tell us, over your years of experience, what are the 5 biggest mistakes that swimmers and their crews make? Starting maybe a year before they come to you. What are the biggest mistakes they make?
Without offending them?
No names.
No names, but I mean without offending them in as much as it's quite a few swimmers have the idea that they are the only thing that matters and they are the swimmer. I have been told on numerous occasions by swimmers that I'm only the taxi driver, and I don't, and what they don't understand is that, especially if you're doing anything like a record swim, it's a partnership. They are my 3rd engine. All they are actually is a machine going through the water, and I'm doing all the work getting them to where they should be and how they should be there. And they say to me, well, you haven't swum the channel, so you don't know what you're doing. And I say, yes, but I've crossed the channel 800 times, so I have a pretty good idea where I'm going. And that's one of the problems. The other problem is a total lack of understanding. They go hell-bent for leather with their training, and they don't appreciate that the only way to train for the channel is to swim it. You can prepare in your training, but it's not swimming the channel, and what you do in your preparation will be nothing like what you're doing when you swim the channel. And they come full of doubts, and what I say to my swimmers is, you can't start with a negative attitude. You've got to go with a positive attitude. You've got to understand that no matter what happens, whether you're successful or unsuccessful, starting is the success. And the fact that you started and got to that starting point, the crossing is only the icing of the cake on all your training and your change of lifestyle. And the other thing is, they don't appreciate how it will affect them when they finish. Their attitude towards life after a swim is usually different to the one before they start. And they come with timetables, and they've got everything sorted out to a timetable, and they're going to have a slice of banana at 7:22 and 30 seconds, and they're going to have a cup of tea at 8:23 and 40 seconds, and they've got
with 1.5 sugars.
Yeah. No, 5 or 6 sugars. But again, they don't actually think 5 or 6 sugars. They think, we'll just spoon it in, and they don't really think to themselves it needs to be anything special. So they use standard refined sugars. And They don't understand, and for some reason they will not read up on the understanding side of a swim. Your body will only absorb X number of calories, around about 250 in an hour if you're working hard swimming. So it's no good piling loads of food into you. It makes your stomach feel heavy, it makes you slow down, it makes you feel uncomfortable, and it doesn't do you any good. And it's got to come out one end, because if it can't be digested, it has to come out one end. Whichever end it is, it doesn't really matter, but it comes out one end. So you've got all those things that they don't understand and don't look at, and they think if they can pile it in, they're going to go or absorb all the calories and swim. They don't ever do enough training on the longer swims. Your body will run for 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours, 4.5 hours if you really put a lot of effort into swim. The average swimmer has about 1,500 calories because they're learning. A swimmer that's trained hard and working hard boosts up to about 2,000 calories in reserve. If you're using 700 calories an hour wasted on your swimming, and you're only putting 250 calories back in again, or 240 or something like that, then you run out of calories at 6 hours. And that then creates about a half an hour to an hour of depression. And they've trained repetitively, so the body suddenly says, hey, just a minute, we only do 4.5 hours, why are you pushing me to 5? Or why are you pushing me to 6? And so they have to go through a depression period, and that's when it starts to fall to pieces. If they can get through that period, that's all well and good, but they then start to doubt themselves, because they're pushing to give themselves confidence, a lot of them, and then they start to doubt themselves because they thought they had it all sorted, and they suddenly realise they're swimming the channel. And quite a lot of them, that starts when they're standing on the beach in the pitch dark with rollers wrapped around their toes, thinking, what am I up to? It's not the same as the harbour. There's water out, there's waves. And we've actually had swimmers say to us, oh, there's waves, because they do their training in a pond. And so it's really an understanding, and I think that's the bit that is addictive about channel swimming, because it's different and it's not normal, and they are putting themselves outside their box that they don't really want to be, but they have to do it because they've got to try it, sort of thing. And you talk to them, and we actually stopped. We used to say to them before, you shouldn't really be doing that. Now we just don't say anything until they ask. We say, swim until you can, and then come and see us when you've got a problem, because you'll have a problem.
You can use names on this next part. When you look back on all of the crossings, what were the most, while being safe, what were the most heroic, inspiring, gutsy people or crossing or events you've been involved with?
To be honest with you, there's so many. There isn't an unexciting channel swim. I would be bored. I only do channel swimming because I enjoy it, and I do it because it's a nice way to pass the time. It's also very nice to have the money, but I am at the moment 73, and at 73 I should be sitting in the back garden drinking gin and tonic on a nice sunny day in the middle of the summer, not out there swimming the channel. But I thoroughly enjoy it, and every swim is different, and the motivation that you put in. So in actual fact, some of the swims that are most memorable are the ones that were a struggle, when you're spending 4 or 5 hours in the doorway talking persons through their next stroke. At the same time, you're making sure that they're not going beyond their limit, and making sure that they're actually swimming within their means. As I say to them, if you can argue, you can swim. Get your head down and go. If you're silent and you're not answering me, then don't be surprised if I say get out, because that's when I start to worry. And the other thing you said about the swimmers, The habit now is to pump yourself through a full of paracetamol as you swim. And they don't appreciate that me as a pilot and Lance and the other pilots, they look at them. If we can't see where the problem is because it's like paracetamol, it's a problem to us. Because we can't work out at which stage they're safe or not safe. So they should only be taking the actual paracetamol for pain when they've got pain. And there's the number of times when they've said to me, oh, I've got shoulder pain, I got this, that, and they say, can I have a pill? So I put the paracetamol out to the arm that they say has got pain in it. It comes up the water so fast you wouldn't believe, to grab the pill, and I say, I thought there was something wrong with that. It's a psychological swim from our point of view, and well, from my point of view, because we enjoy being involved, and all of them on the boat enjoy being involved. Tanya is a swimmer, and she's the second captain, and Paul is the second captain with Lance, and he's there. They're all qualified channel pilots. Mike Ball is a channel swimmer, and he's there, and he's the one that kneels in the doorway and gives them a nudge and gives them a shout. And they when they're stuck, you get them there, you boost them up. Tanya has a system which we worked out between us with the fact that she does a double feed and then a double feed and then a single feed, a double feed, a single feed within an hour when they get past it to reboost them, and we work on the basis that we can feed them maximum or whatever it is as on that basis to get them back to square one. And if they're ill and it makes them sick, we just put a bit more in, because it doesn't matter, it's what's going back into the body. And those sort of problems are the things that, so it's like Mike will turn up with a neatly sliced up cuss trimmed sandwich, which is a honey sandwich with lots of sugar and butter, and it's not part of their list and not part of their menu, but they like it. We'll give them a cup of coffee with honey in it, and the support team saying, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that, they wanted this and they wanted that and they wanted their flat coke. And I say, stuff what they want, that's what they need. And so you become very involved. So there doesn't become any swim, there's a lot of memories, but you can't point out which ones are the difference, because they are all different and they all fit into a different little square and a different system. I've had swimmers, and it's quite complicated when you get involved, because you have to understand, or try and understand, how that swimmer's going to react. So I've been known to make swimmers swim when they know that they shouldn't. I know they shouldn't be in the water and I should take them out, but I have a talk to them and say, look, you've got another 4 hours swimming and you're totally knackered. Tell me when you want to get out. But they have to say, I want to get out. I won't give them the excuse that the pilot said I got out for me to get out, and we take photographs of them when they come out, when they're completely shattered, because 15 minutes later when they've recovered they say, why did you take me out? What was wrong with you? I say, that's what was wrong with you. And they look at you and say, oh, all right then. But it's a different sort of thing. It's camaraderie. You can't do it as a job. And especially if you're going into doing more than a one crossing. When Eddie did the four-way this year, the team, the boat team, had to work very, very hard, and Ed had to work very, very hard to sort out the navigation, and it was determination by everyone that got it. Whereas, if you were doing it just for the money, then you'd be saying, oh, you're past it, get out, we've got to go home, the pub shuts soon.
I don't know if you listened to Sarah Thomas's interview, but Sarah said something that would absolutely please you. She said, I had absolute confidence in my pilot, Eddie Spelling. It never once occurred to me he didn't know exactly what he was doing at every moment, and I completely trusted him.
Well, that's actually most of the people they work on that basis, and they have to have that sort of relationship before you start. Trent, at the end of his write-up, said exactly the same thing, that he had full faith, and he lost it on the 5th hour, and Christoph lost it on the 5th hour, and Christoph had a little paddy on the 5th hour, and threw his cup away and everything else, and then his trainer said to me, "What can I do?" And I stuck my head out the window and said, "Oi, it's my reputation out here today. Put arse into gear and effing swim." And he looked at me and he swam, and he didn't say anything, but he swam with a lot more. He was annoyed with me, so he put it into the swim, and that was enough to get him going and get him to finish. Peter, on the other hand, didn't say anything. He got in the water and swam, and the year before he swam the channel, because he'd been back 3 or 4 times and hadn't got a swim, and he swam it in a southeasterly force 6, and he did it in 7 hours 25 minutes. And I said to him, that was a good swim, Peter. You did it in the second speed. He said, "There's no number 2 place."
Tell us about the worst selections for crew. Tell us about the people who came with their 3-month-old baby or their 112-year-old uncle.
Well, actually, I know I shouldn't say this, but actually the worst person that comes is the trainer. Because 90% of the time the trainer is trying to make a reputation, trying to keep a reputation going, and trying to convince everyone that what he got paid for being, or she got paid for being, a trainer is good. So they take over, as I say, well, you're only the taxi driver, take us to France. And they tend to override everything, and I had one with a millionaire from America who had 2,000 odd employees, and I had his wife on board, and I had his trainer, and his trainer was doing all the rubbish and everything else, and he was the same thing. He was getting all fluffy and wanted to get out and wanted to stop and everything else, and I just leant out and I said to him, "Hey, why don't you just get your head down and swim and shut up?" I said, and I said a few other things which I won't say on the screen, and he did it. He didn't speak to me for 2 hours, but he swam to the beach, because we were only, a mile and a half off going into Sand Gap. And his wife nudged me after. She said, "I'm going to eat out on this for a long time." He said, no one's ever spoke to him like that. But that was the motivation he needed to get him there. And the other side of it is that he would be very annoyed with himself if he hadn't got there, especially if you're that high-poweredness, and that is it does drive people, is their inclination. They are reasonably selfish and reasonably self-centered to do the swim. So, but it's a job. I do what I can when I'm out there. It doesn't always work. Some people don't like me. I don't worry about it at all, and I don't actually dislike or like anyone. I get on with a lot of people, but to me, I'm there to give them what I can, and I'm there to enjoy my swim.
Last question for you. What's your best guess the first channel swim of the year you're going to do?
This year? Well, unfortunately, the world's full of politicians who really should be in a nursery with their nappy being changed at regular intervals. They don't appear to have any idea about what they're doing, where they live, and how the real world actually works. I would like to think that we would be swimming in mid-July. I've always, from looking at the pattern and looking at how it's going and what's happening, it's managed to drop in more or less with what we're thinking and what we're predicting. But we had a 14-day quarantine lifted between us and France and flying into Britain, and then we had a 14-day imposed, and then they had it lifted again, and then the American Airlines complained because it was lifted on the Channel and the Irish route but not on Heathrow and Gatwick, and so they decided they'd put it back into place on the Dover. But I'm not quite sure how the country's going to get by without the lorry drivers delivering, and then they're supposed to be doing 14 days quarantine, although they're not. And America's in a mood of revolution. Italy and Spain and people don't know what they're up to. They're breaking loose and getting out, and they've got a very dictatorial regime looking after them. Turkey's going back. The news today was that they're opening up their cruising and opening up their borders, and they're encouraging the hotels to open as of the 27th of May. But they haven't got any flights arranged, so I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to get there. But this is if the economy takes an importance over the coronavirus, which at some stage whoever's doing the decision making has got the awkward decision of deciding which of the two is the more important and which is the two is too damaging. At the moment they're saying that coronavirus is shutting down the British hospitals for the cancer cases and the heart patients, of which they expect more people to die from cancer and heart problems because they haven't been treated while the coronavirus is running than they would have been if it was running on. So it's all a big balance, and everybody's afraid of making the balance because it's going to cost them votes. So if I think the original and the flu epidemics, because I'm a bit on the old side now, so I've seen 3 of these already, more or less, not quite as bad as coronavirus, but we've seen them. And I think that whatever happens, the only real answer is that the majority of people who catch it will possibly end up with immunity, and they won't have it as bad as the ones that are suffering from it. And the reason it's really a roll of the dice as to who suffers and who doesn't. And I think on that basis, if you work out that we've got 62 million in Britain and we've had 35,000 deaths, the percentage is very low, but they don't work in percentages, they scare everyone with numbers. It's the same with America, 342 million people and they've got 90,000 deaths. It'll be 100,000 by the end of the weekend. But 100,000 deaths in 342 million people, it is drastic, and it is a horrible thought, but the percentage rate is very, very low. And there's nothing you can do in an epidemic or pandemic situation like this except sit back. And I don't understand the distribution of blame, because if you don't know what you're up against, how can you be expected to react? You only know afterwards what you should have done. You never know beforehand, which is a little bit like channel swimming. Channel swimmers analysed it afterwards and said they should have done this and they should have done that. But they didn't actually work out because they didn't know. That's what I say. The only way to train for a channel swim is get in the water and get wet. You prepare yourself and face the cliff.
I'm going to be turning on my tracker in middle of July, and I expect to see you and Lance out there. Mike Oram, thank you very much for your time this evening.
You're welcome. Thanks. Cheers, Ned.